queridas, queridos. Welcome back to the Beam and Flow podcast, a nitty-gritty exploration of your body, energy, awareness, movement, and flow. I am your host, Chloé. Here we go. Enjoy the show. Buenas. I am so excited to share this interview this week. I sat down with Isa Herrera. She is a pelvic floor physical therapist who started her own practice in New York City and is now helping countless women online through her at-home pelvic floor therapy program. And I had the gift, because she truly saved and changed my life, of working with Isa and her team at Renew Physical Therapy in New York City about a decade ago. And so I'm just so grateful that I was able to sit down with Isa, and we get into a whole bunch. We talk about why Isa became a pelvic floor physical therapist specifically, and why she started her own practice. We talk about her experience of what she calls the Doctor Roadshow, which I know I have been on. I'm sure so many of us have been on, where you go from doctor to doctor getting diagnosis and another diagnosis and misdiagnosis, and everyone's poking and prodding at you and no one's actually helping you feel better. So she talks about her experience with the Doctor Roadshow. We talk about how physical conditions and present and the emotional responses that are associated with them. Isa gives us some tools for regulating our nervous system, and why we talk about why it's important to educate women on their pelvic floors, about how mindset affects healing. And we look at what you're doing every day and see how that's affecting your health. We talk about how that simple practice can really change your life. So I'm so excited to share this episode with you. I'm going to be linking below to her pelvic floor program, and she sent me her reverse Kegel handout, which I'm going to include in the show notes as well for you. So dive in, share this episode with a friend, with a family member, with someone you really care about, because I promise you, they're experiencing some sort of pelvic floor issue, or they have, and you didn't know about it. So you want to share this episode. Here we go with Isa Herrera. Estamos aquí. So you're in Florida now, right?
Well, right now I'm in New York. I'm in the Catskills.
Okay.
Yeah, we're here for a couple of weeks, and then I go back down to Florida. But
Okay.
yes, I live in Florida now, in Miami.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to set the stage for our listeners by saying that I am so excited to be talking to you, Isa, because I'm gonna get a little bit emotional, but like, you've changed my life in such a profound way. And I think back to when I walked into Renew Physical Therapy 10 years ago. And it was 10 years ago. And the interesting thing is, you yourself never actually worked on me, but you had created such a space of healing that was so different than any other women's health practitioner space that I had ever been into. And so, to set the stage, I came after my second endometriosis removal surgery. And I had been suffering from intense pelvic pain for over a decade at that point. And I had physical therapy, internal physical therapy before, but it was not the experience that I had at Renew. And to set the stage, I was in so much pain and I had been suffering so much. When I went to my previous physical therapist, I remember, as she was showing me how to do internal work, or not even showing me, she was just doing it, I was screaming in pain. And so when I heard that I had to go again, the first time I went, I got stoned outside. I took a shot of something, I don't know what, before I went in, and I told my therapist what happened. I was like, "Look, I'm terrified to be here, but I know I have to be here, and this is the state that I'm in." And she was so patient and so understanding and was just like, "Okay, that's where you're at, and hopefully next week we'll be in a different place and we'll go from there." And you had the I'll never forget, instead of a sheet
Yeah.
on the bed, you had sarongs, and I was just like, "Oh man, I found my place." Like, just the setup of everything was so beautiful, it was so warm, it was so inviting, and it was about healing and not about, um, diagnosing a problem, and I felt that when I walked in, and so I would really like to just start the conversation by saying, what led you to creating Renew and everything that you've done since then? Because you've been moving mountains, mama. But tell us how it all came to be.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm super honored to be doing this talk with you, and I hope that it helps a lot of women understand that they really have ownership of their own health, you know? And they say that everything happens for a reason. And the day that my daughter was born was the day that my purpose was born as well. I had no idea. I was a physical therapist in those days. I had no idea of the pelvic floor. I mean, I had like a 30-minute anatomy lesson, but nothing really concrete. So I really couldn't help myself. And I had had all this vaginal pain and prolapse and leaking. And I kept going back to my doctor. And he kept saying it was normal. This is part of motherhood. You're going to get better. And of course, it never got better. And after experiencing what I call the Dr. Rose show and having going to clinics where healing wasn't part of the process, where you were treated like a number, where you were dismissed, discriminated against, where they would tell you the pain was in your head, you're hysterical. Here's a antidepressant. Here is a muscle relaxer. Here is a shot. I knew that when I opened up my clinic on Madison Avenue, I wanted it to be about the healing journey for the woman, right? Because I didn't have that experience. I had a very dismissive experience, and I hashtag the Dr. Rose show because I went from one doctor to another doctor from, and no resolution, nothing natural. And maybe it was my female intuition, but I knew that there was a better way. I knew what I was experiencing wasn't normal. And so then I went into the rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland, and I went into this cave where I learned everything. And I said, well, it's a muscle like everything else. It's the human body. It's the central place, the pelvic floor, connected to your soul, your spirit, and your well-being. So I said, why don't I just flip the shame and the silence and everything that I was feeling, the embarrassment around, and say, let me treat this like a physical condition, which is what it is. It's not a psychological disorder, although many women are led to believe that it's a psychological disorder, but it's actually not. It can make us crazy because it made me crazy for a long time. But so that was the journey. And so one of the other things that I realized is when I went to see, and most PTs in those days didn't know what they were doing, there was no standardization of care. So when I opened my clinic, I knew what was working because I had been working on my own body for a whole year, right? And then I said, this is it. This is my path. This is my journey. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to help women not have to go through this experience that I just went through. So I took the protocols and I made sure that everybody on my team was trained in how to work consistently with the pelvic floor in a way that makes sense. Because when you go to pelvic floor physical therapy in any clinic, there's no standard of care, there's no process. So if you saw me, or if you saw my coworker, or if you saw another PT in my clinic, you would still have the same experience, because I knew that uh, to get to where you needed to be, we had to empower the women to do the work. Like you said, you went to the PT and the PT was doing it to you. In
Mhm.
our clinic, we show the women, and in my online programs and everything, how to do it for yourself. It's not rocket scientist. Any woman can learn how to do this. Um, but we are dealing with Western medicine. We are dealing with a system that's broken, very broken. And we're dealing with a system that says, let me take care of you. I know what's best for your body, right? And that no longer works. If the last 3 years have proven anything to us, it's that we need to have our own sovereignty over our own bodies. So that was the whole process of creating this I call it a revolution, actually, from the clinic to then I opened a much bigger clinic, which is probably the one that you went to, the really big one. And then I pivoted and took everything from my clinics and I went online and created this self-help um, healing programs, because being on Madison Avenue was great. It was right. It was everything that I wanted. It was all my dreams, but I wanted to help more women, and people were flying all over the country to come and see us, from England. I mean, you name it, everywhere. And I said, why don't I make this easier for everybody? And so in the beginning, when I did this, it was really interesting because everybody was telling me, well, you can't teach a woman how to do this on her own. And
But
I'm
you
like,
were already doing it.
exactly. I was already doing it. And so, a lot of people in the industry would be like, oh, no, this is unethical. I mean, why are you doing this? And I'm like, and then COVID hit, and then now everybody's doing it, right? So now I'm like, a rock star in forward thinking, but actually, it's always been the same way. I mean, I come from indigenous healers from Puerto Rico. My mother was a indigenous healer, my grandmother, my father. So we know natural medicine, and we know that you have to the individual has to partake, right? You can't
Mhm.
and lay there and think that you're going to heal yourself by having someone do something to your body and you're not actively partaking in the healing yourself, right? Healing doesn't happen, you know, to us. We create the healing in our mindset, in our hearts, and in our bodies. So that was the whole journey. I know it's a long response, but I'm a firm believer that you are not, your diagnosis. You are not what they tell you you are. You are not your pain, your endometriosis, your fibromyalgia. We can transcend above that. And we could, step outside the diagnosis and be like, okay, what can I do to help myself today? Even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's 3 minutes, what can I do?
Mhm. So, I would love to talk a little bit about how you see the healing journey with the pelvic floor typically happen. Like I know for me, because I had been written off so many times by the doctor roadshow, like you call it, um,
Mhm.
I I couldn't get to the emotional or spiritual part immediately. It had to come through the physical first. And I'm curious if that's what you see with most women or if it's a mix. How do you typically see that journey happen?
Well, I mean, the way I typically see the pelvic healing journey happening is a lot of education first. I think that we lack education. I think that that's one of the hindrance to pelvic healing. We feel that there's a lot of taboo, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of silence, right? There's a lot of self-blaming. There's a lot of self-hating. And once we understand our own unique anatomy, once we understand and and educate ourselves, like sometimes the simple things that we're doing every day are the things that are causing us the most harm. And so for me, it always started with education. Like we would always start the first visit with education. We bring the model out, we explain things, we show women their anatomy, we take a mirror out, and we may not even do an internal um, evaluation on the first visit. We may just look externally, and by looking externally, you can, a picture of the vulva paints 1,000 words. You can just tell so much. So the healing has to start with self-education, because a lot of women, by no fault of our own, because it's been actually designed this way, that we are this information is not. Now it's better. I mean, it wasn't like this before, as you know, when you and I were going through it, where you couldn't, no one even said the word pelvic floor. Now every time Dick and Harry has a shingle up, with the pelvic floor, and you know, creating these things. So education is the key thing. And then um, down regulating the nervous system, I think, is really important. So we always taught diaphragmatic breathing. We started from the abdominals. and breathing and mindset, right? Because women with pelvic floor dysfunction have very heightened nervous systems. And of course, I mean, who wouldn't? If you're leaking on yourself, you have pain, you can't make love, you can't walk, you can't cook, you can't lift your kid, you have pain all the time. It's going to play on your head. And then so that pain becomes a way to, you're like, whoa, you don't want to let anything in. So and the nervous system is really like jacked up. So we can't heal as women if our nervous systems are up here, and the pelvic floor will respond to your emotions. As we know, there's no negative thought anymore. There's no innocent thought. I wouldn't say negative, but innocent thought. Like what you think, your body has a physiological response to, right? It will create a cascade of reactions in your body. So we always talked about, I used to call it catastrophic thinking, catastrophic thoughts, how to turn the thoughts around, how to deal with flares. So I think that education, mindset, bringing that nervous system into some kind of level playing field, which by the way could take a year. I mean, I know my nervous system was so shot. It took like, a year and a half. I was like, oh my God, I didn't trust anybody. I was like, after going through the Dr. Roadshow and having injections in my vagina and antidepressants and biotics and muscle relaxers and you name it, they just threw everything out there because they don't know what they're doing, the majority of them. So that's an easy way to start in my online programs. I start that way too. People are like, oh my God, why do you have this module on education? I'm like, because you don't know your anatomy. I mean, what can I tell you? If you don't know what if you can't label the bits and the pieces of your vulva and your pelvic floor, how are you going to do an internal uh, technique, right? So those two things is diaphragmatic breathing, and then the other thing that I really focus on, and everybody wants to get to the juicy things and the vagina stretches and the Kegels and reverse Kegels, but you have to look at what you're doing every day that's detrimental for your health, right? Because sometimes you do something and the body responds, right? So if you're leaking and it happens during a certain time, or if you have pain and it happens during a certain time, then that's your body sending a message to you about you so that you can do something. So we have to have this mindfulness when it comes to the pelvic floor. This really sort of like, okay, let me stay as present as possible. So when I get that flare, when I get that pain, when something happens, how can I change that behavior so it is working for me and not against me? So we have to really become like a detective. And it involves a lot of self reflection, not in a way that we condemn ourselves, but in a way that we express self compassion, right? And self forgiveness. So we're really like women who are, we typically will give the self compassion to someone else. We'll forgive everybody. We'll bring the soup. We'll do all this nurturing. But when it comes to the self, we're so busy. We're so, the job, the kids, the grandkids, you name it. And it puts us on the back burner. So this idea of education, right, downregulating the nervous system and mindfulness is the key, because once you lock those three things in, everything else is easy. The whatever it is that you're going to do that you enjoy doing, so you got to bring joy into the work. That's why I give a lot in my program. So people are like, oh my God, so much. I'm like, well, pick what you pick what's working for you, pick what you like, and stick with that. Pick what brings you results, right? Because if you're doing an exercise, if you're doing a technique or anything that you don't really resonate with, that you don't enjoy doing, you're not going to do it. And
Mhm.
that's why a lot of women have yo-yo healing, right? They don't understand their anatomy, their systems are jacked up, and they're doing things because they were told to do things, and the things that they're doing, they hate doing. So how is that going to ever bring any results? How's that ever going to work for anybody?
And the program, there's so much that you provide, so many tools. And I remember when I first started, I was working through another apprenticeship program for body and movement and awareness, which is eventually how I became a body worker. And um, in that time, I was waking up at like 5 a.m. to try and get everything done before work. And it really became like this like chore that of all the stuff that I had to get done. And you had designed this yoga program at a certain point for me. Um, and so I was doing the yoga stretches and I was on my mat and I was like having it out with God, with myself, like why do I have to get up and do this every day? Like nobody else is having to wake up 2 hours early just to get this in. Like I'm so upset. How is this happening? And then I took a breath and I'll never forget the thought shifted to, okay, I'm loving myself by doing this. And then I took another breath. I am loved. If I'm loving myself, I am loved. And then I took another breath and I started crying and everything just started releasing. And that was a day where it started shifting from something I was doing because someone told me this was going to make me feel better to, oh no, this is something deep is unlocking in me. And I'm curious as to what the conversation is for you around women who maybe don't identify as having pelvic pain, still learning to do this work. Because I feel like there's a part of it for me anyway that's like this inherent truth that it's been taken from us intentionally and hidden from us. And so much of this practice is really just supportive of your well-being anyway. And I think part of it is that we only come to these truths after we're suffering and in pain. But maybe part of the reason we're suffering in pain is because we didn't have these truths taught to us at an early age. Like if we were taught, just like you're taught in gym class, that you should run and you should exercise and you should stretch your body, that there are stretches for your internal muscles too, and that there's work to be done on your internal core. I feel like that would have made such a difference, and I'm curious as to how that conversation goes for you.
Well, I'm glad that you had that experience about when you were there and you said, "This is about self-love. I am loved." Because ultimately, we're not really taught to love ourselves. We are taught to judge ourselves, hate ourselves, think ourselves of imperfect. Actually, I wrote something about this today. And the standard of beauty is ridiculous, and you're aging, and so you should be put out to pasture. So women's are constantly being told that we are just not good enough, that we are not good enough, that we're not loved, that we are not good enough to be loved, right? And many of us growing up maybe experienced conditional love, like where the love was based on a condition. Or maybe, like me, a broken home, you experienced the lack of love, right? So these kind of things leave holes in our bodies, right? And the pelvic floor, because, and I'm going to bring out the model, because it is a basket right here. It holds. It's the first and second chakra. So it's going to hold your trauma, your emotion, your self-worth, your creativity. It holds everything. And unfortunately, we do really live in this broken system, right? So and this should be taught alongside the sex education that the kids get, which, by the way, my daughter told me what they were teaching, and I was like, this is ridiculous. They need to bring someone in like me to teach the real deal, to teach fertility, to teach uh, pelvic floor work, not only for women, but for kids, for men as well, because they also suffer. I mean, there's a whole thing that we can talk about that. So, education right now, pelvic education, has to begin in the house because it ain't not going to happen anywhere else. So, it is our responsibility as sisters, mothers, grandmothers, you know, to bring this education and to have these frank conversations with our kids so they don't suffer like we did. I believe in lineage healing, where if you heal yourself, you heal backwards and you heal forward. So to have this moment of suffering with your pelvis and with your vagina sometimes is a gift in disguise. We may not see it like that, right? Because we are so into the suffering. But once we start to heal ourselves, once we come out of this tunnel and there's the light, and we understand the importance of the work, then we can become a spokesperson. So for me, it's like if I teach one person in my program, I always encourage them to teach their grandkids, their daughters, their sisters, their mothers, anybody who's in that vicinity, because the education is so poor along the pelvic floor, is so expensive, and we only get this education when something bad happens, when it's already like me, all broken and fired up, and really so much trauma in the pelvis. And so we need to educate women, for childbirth. Like my niece just had a baby, and we went through a whole process on how positioning, how to protect the perineum, how to say no to things that she didn't want. It was a very difficult position for her to be in the room, but she's young. I was texting, I said, pick her up, do this. It was a very interesting experience that even these days, in childbirth, women are still experiencing a tremendous amount of obstetrical trauma. And so sometimes it begins with that. So this education, which is the womanly arts of self healing, is should be, in my humble opinion, is is more preventative. If we start it and we know it early, then we could help our kids and future generations be more in their power. I'm not saying that things are not going to happen, but as long as you know what to do, you come from a position of empowerment, right? And so healthcare has to be more about empowerment. These days is more about take this pill, take this gadget, this gimmick, whatever, sit on this chair, put on these pants, and it's going to heal you. And so we have to get out of this magical thinking that someone's going to come and save us. Now, I blame Disney movies for that, because everybody's always like, "Tick, tick, 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 tick." Someone's going to come and save you. And in this story, in the story of our lives, we're the heroines of our own story. We save ourselves. And we have to, and there's no one else that's going to do it. And I'm a firm believer in that you're the one that actually has to really take care of yourself, because self love is about self care. But we're not even taught self care. We're taught that self care might be a manicure, which is fine, or a pedicure, or a bubble bath. But that's on the surface level. We need to know our bodies, and we need to know how to work with our bodies and how to heal our bodies on our own through simple exercises.
And it's really when you said that healing happens through lineage, 7 generations before and behind, I completely believe that. And I remember a few years into the program, I was talking about it with my mom, my sisters, my grandma was there. Todos somos boricua.
Mhm.
And grandma goes, pero that's a lot of touching, no? Like, touching yourself like a lot. And I said, well, yeah, grandma. And she was like, no sé. I don't really know what I think about that. But I know that I planted a seed, right? And even if they don't remember that story consciously, like I planted a seed. And I think that for a lot of women, we've been raised, even if it wasn't with an outright shame over our bodies, there was this like, oh, but we're not gonna like touch ourselves though. Like that's like, well, we're gonna do it, but we're not gonna like talk about it. Like to do it for healing, what? It doesn't even register as something that is integral to life. It's something that unfortunately we have to teach each other now. Um, and I'm curious how that narrative shifted. I know that you come from a line of indigenous healers from Puerto Rico, and so how has that shifted in terms of what you were taught about your pelvic floor, how you teach your daughter? I would love to hear about that.
Well, that's a great question, Chloe. So thank you for asking, because this lineage healing is the portal, right? It is the way through for future generations, and generations, and my mom's generation. So my mother has 7 kids, all natural, never took a epidural, all vaginal births. And even with that, she never actually ever spoke about it. In my family, we just did not speak about vaginas and childbirth and pain, sexual intimacy. It was really frowned upon. You were expected to be a virgin until you got married. So this is the lineage that I came from. Very hush hush, which is why when I was going through my own healing, I felt so much shame, right? And I was so quiet and I felt so embarrassed because I felt like as a physical therapist, I should have known better, but I didn't because everything was always very quiet. And so I had to really get rid of this shame guilt cycle that I had been experiencing for a long time. And with my mom now, she's more open. So I have her like on my bladder supplement, right, to calm down her bladder. I teach her Kegels. I got her vaginal weights, even though I don't think I got that from Mother's Day. And she was like, I'm not using this. So I was like, okay, fine. Now with my daughter, like moving forward, my daughter knows everything about the pelvic floor. She knows, and she's 18, and she knew this when she first came over, and she told me that one of her girlfriends had told her everything about sex. And I'm like, hold up. She was like 7. And I was like, okay, that means this is the moment. I took out my anatomy book. We sat down. We had a whole conversation. We spoke about everything. Um, we spoke about virginity, how to, intimacy, and that your body is your temple, that you don't give this away to everybody, that sex is to be shared, it's a respectful, connection with another individual. And so my daughter read my book by the time she was 10. So she knew, I didn't know she read the book, but she had read it. So now at this age, she knows how to self heal herself. She knows how to do pelvic massages. She knows how to do the abdominal massage. She knows foam rolling. She knows meditation. I mean, it's a whole different generation. And and my sister the same way, and my other sister, where I'm constantly like, and my nieces, so they know. And I'm like, no, you don't have to suffer. No, this is fixable. No, it's not normal to have pain with sexual intimacy. No, he's not that big. Okay. These are the things. Oh, he's so big, I can't accommodate. I said, no, we stretch to accommodate. Um, so it was that moment, when my daughter, would come and say, oh, I just did a massage on myself and I know how to fix it. That was the moment that I was like, okay, I'm changing the world because I'm changing my lineage, right? And sometimes it's difficult because a lot of women don't want to talk about it. But with my own kid and my nieces and her birth and everything that's going on, I'm not in their faces about it, but I'm just saying there's a better way. And if you want to know, you reach out, but you should start with education. If you can't identify all your bits, we have a problem,
Mhm.
right? So it's interesting that this education, like I always say, it has to start with the self, and then you bring it to your tribe. And then if you have a platform, you bring it, like you have this platform, you bring it to in a different way to the world. So we each do our part to make sure that women are 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 feeling that their best selves, living their best lives, and really connecting to their joy. Because when there's an issue with the pelvic floor, and there's pain, or there's a endometriosis, and there's a lot of pain in the body, it is very difficult to feel joy and happiness. And so it really does something to the family, to the kids, to the it affects the family. And I know that because when I was going through my pelvic healing, I just was not the same person. Like I look back and I was like, I had just gone insane for a period of time because there was no programs, there was no podcasts like this, no programs that 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 gave women hope.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that was the most one of the most frustrating things was after going through 10 years of no diagnosis, misdiagnosis. We think, no, we take it back. No, yes. To finally have the diagnosis of endometriosis and then be told, oh, by the way, there's no cure. So all we can really offer you is surgery to remove what we found and more birth control. And
Mm.
and then finally somebody said, and maybe some pelvic floor just to help you after the surgery. And I remember thinking, don't there's no cure that you know of. Like there's no way that you're telling me that this is my life at 27 years old, that this is all it's ever going to be. Absolutely not. Like that, no. And I think there's this primal protective spirit of feminine spirit within us that almost doesn't get woken up anymore in our culture until something happens to our bodies, or until we are in the process of giving birth and then something happens in that way. Um, and and there's something too, I think, waking that up before. Like, I'm wondering, like, how can we wake that up in women before it gets to the place that they have to use it.
This primal feminine spirit, I think it lives within all of us. I think the way to wake it up is to start trusting ourselves, and to trust the messages of our bodies, and to really tap into our intuition and to quiet the mind, right? We are given messages every single day, intuitive messages about don't go there, don't sign that contract, don't do work with that individual. And sometimes we don't trust ourselves. We override these signals and then we get into trouble. So what about if we all just step back and said that my intuition is my primal force? My intuition is what's going to lead me to where I need to be. That what I feel is valid, that what I sense is real, that what I'm feeling, right, is what I should be listening to. But we're not taught to tap in to this sense of this intuition. And so it gets squashed down, but many of us don't even have it anymore. And we just are operating like a robot every single day. And so we can just go out to nature more, right? Let's go into get out of the concrete jungle. And even if you go for a walk in nature, because nature is so healing, go to the ocean, go to the lake, go to the park, stand on the grass, ground, right? Which is one of the fundamental things that I teach. Then you can start to awaken this primal spirit. You can start to, it can happen like that. It's so quick for us because it's already there. We just are not listening, or we're squashing it down, or we don't trust ourselves, or we don't believe the messages of our bodies to be valid. And so once we know that what we feel is real and we follow that voice, that signal, that intuition, that emotion, then we're going to make better choices for our lives. Because we know, and I was just at a business meeting yesterday, and I got like a bunch of guys around me, and they're like all telling me something, but my intuition is telling me something else. And I stopped the meeting and I said, thank you everyone, but my intuition is telling me something different. And I said, and this is what we're going to do. Now, it takes a lot to be in a meeting with a bunch of men that and you're like, oh, it doesn't feel right, right? Something doesn't feel right. Something is off. Something is wrong with this that they're coming up with. And I easily could have said, oh, yeah, they're right. What do I know? That, but I said, no, you know what? I'm feeling something. This is valid. And so I stood up and I said, no, anytime I go against my intuition, my intuitive side, the messages of my body, it always comes back to bite me in the ass. And so that's how I ended the meeting. And then, my husband comes over and he goes, your intuition. I'm like, yes, my intuition. And so we have to validate that for us. We have to say it's a real thing, right? It's as
Absolutely.
real for us as it is for men. It's for all people. We all have it. It's what makes us so incredible as a species. It's what
Hmm.
makes us so powerful. It's why we know that when we think something, we can create it, right? Your thoughts create your reality. That is the most powerful thing that we ever going to really learn. So this is the moment. So you have to just really connect to the elements and connect to nature and connect to that quiet place and connect to your voice. And then you got to trust it. And you trust it once, it's a nice result. Then you do it again. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I'm more, I'm functioning more from this level, which I call it the vagina level, right? It's all visceral and it's the intuition, right? It's the first chakra, the chakra of creativity, feeling safe in the world. So for me, it's like I'm going to listen to my vagina. I'm going to listen to what I feel and I'm going to follow that. So to tap into that primal thing, we don't want something bad to happen, because sometimes when we don't listen, shit happens, right? We want to just be uh, just more mindful of the voice,
Mhm.
more mindful of the sense. Sometimes it's sense, sometimes it's a feeling, sometimes oh, I feel something in my gut, something doesn't feel right. And so to trust that that's really actually really real for you. And it's your higher self talking to you about you. And it's telling you, oh, honey, don't go down that road because that's not a good road. But sometimes we just still go down that road because that's the path that we have to take in order to learn whatever life lesson is that we need to learn so that we can level up, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the path is not going to be hunky dory, no suffering. And, there's going to be all those things along the way. But it's like, how do you transmute it? How do you take that darkness, that suffering, right? That pain, that diagnosis, the leaking, how do you change that so you make it work for you? And you take that muck and you turn it to gold, right? So for me, it's kind of like, how long do you stay in the muck? That's the real thing. Like, you're in the muck, things are not right. How fast can you get out of it and then move forward and be like, okay, I experienced that. Okay, it was painful. And sometimes you just gotta be in the emotion of it, right? So I'm a firm believer that you have to, in order to tap into this primal female spirit, you have to feel your feelings. You can't be like swallowing your tears, dimming your light because you don't want to seem like a show off in front of people. You have to shine bright, right? And you have to feel it. There's no way out but through.
Yeah. One of the ways through that I did, and it was something that I intuitively did for myself, but then I remember so I signed up for a belly dancing class, right? And then I went into my session at Renew. This was like a year and a half already I've been going. And you saw me, and my therapist came in. You didn't say a word. My therapist came in and she was like, Issa was looking at the way that you walked in, and she said that she thinks you need to take some belly dancing classes. I said, that's so funny because I signed up for it today. And it's people I don't think would typically think of like belly dancing, or later I did twerk and pole like as for pelvic floor healing, right? And release. But I think besides the internal pelvic floor work, the physically the biggest practices that really worked for me besides that was dancing in a way that moved my hips and reverse Kegels, which no one had walked me
Mhm.
through before. So I know we just have a few minutes left, but would you mind just kind of walking us through why those two can be really useful for so many women?
Well, that's incredible that you did this as part of the healing because a lot of women won't do these particular kind of practices. All movement is important for the pelvic floor. All movement, but in particular the movement that you enjoy, right? So if it's walking, if it's pole, if it's twerking, if it's belly dancing, whatever it is, you know. If it's salsa, for me, it's salsa. I dance salsa every day, like 4 or 5 songs. That's what lights me up. Um, this movement is what increases the circulation to the pelvis, right? It's what keeps the fluid movement moving. It's what keeps the chi activated. And if you're doing something that you love, then it lights you up too. So when you're lit up, the pelvic floor is lit up and it gets healthier. So movement, any movement that you enjoy is something that you should focus on doing on a daily basis. Like I'll take 2 walks today. I'm doing my walks and I'm in nature and I really love it up here. So that's as simple as it can be, just a simple walk. But movement is important. I think sitting is the new smoking for the pelvic floor. And the last 3 years had us all sitting. And I think that there was a lot of tension built up in the pelvic floor, and a lot of anxiety and stress and depression in the pelvic floor because of the lack of movement, the lack of moving your body. So sitting is the new smoking for the pelvic floor. When you're sitting, when you're not moving, the pelvic floor gets stagnant. When it's stagnant, it can get more painful, it can get stressed, and it can get tense. For me, when women suffer from pelvic floor dysfunction, I believe that the majority suffer from what I call a tense vagina, a non-relaxing vagina. That has to do with the level of trauma that we've experienced on a collective level, but on the individual level as well. The pelvis to holds on to that stress, and so we have an industry that tells women contract your vagina, squeeze your vagina, do Kegels, and it's making us tighter, not stronger, tighter and weaker. And it's decreasing the circulation and it's shutting down our primal feminine spirit, because that's what happens. Insert this thing into your vagina and squeeze around it 10,000 times. And it's all really based on sexual pleasure for your partner, not for you. Because women who are tight, they'll have weak orgasms typically. So the reverse Kegel is the single most important exercise that we can do as women, because it opens the pelvis. And when you open the pelvis, right? So you open the pelvis and you do the reverse Kegel, this opens and relaxes. And when it opens and relaxes, you can actually, through your breathing, get the collective trauma, the anxiety, the stress that you're feeling, and release it through your vagina into the Pachamama, earth, and let it transmute it. So for me, when there's so much tension and stress and these muscles are really bound down, the only way to open, release, and normalize and balance is through the reverse Kegel. Now, I coined that in 2004 when I wrote my first book. Now it's everywhere. Okay. But this reverse Kegel is important because it allows us to receive. It allows us to poop and pee, and it allows us to release the trauma. So, and it allows us to relax and open, to then contract and be strong. So it is a psycho spiritual exercise. It is the exercise of the primal feminine spirit, because we're not taught to open, we're not taught to relax, we're taught to contract, 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 contract. And so there's no yin and yang. The pelvic floor is made out of two muscle fibers, slow and fast. So you want to be able to contract, but you also want to be able to release and let go, right? To create that yin and yang and that balance. So for me, there's so much stress in the world, and as women, we typically will collect it in the pelvic floor. It's just the mere shape of it is the collection basket. So
Mhm.
the reverse Kegel, as you do it and you breathe in, and you just close your eyes and breathe in, and just imagine that everything is opening and letting go. And then you can drop whatever you want through the pelvic floor and out. Then you can contract and pull up, because now you have balance. So the reverse Kegel creates balance because it creates power, right? Because you're relaxed to then contract, and it creates normal range of motion. So that is something that I teach. We teach everyone that walked in through the clinic, everyone in the programs, and they're like, wait, hold up. I'm supposed to be doing Kegels. I'm like, well, you have a tense vagina, you have a combination vagina, or you have a scar, or you have endometriosis, fibromyalgia, you name it, right? Lupus. Um, and so your body's already out of balance. So let's create the balance, the relaxation, and then we pull up, and you're going to get better results. The problem with the reverse Kegel is that many times, it's not a problem, it's actually the resolution, is that it will expose the true weakness, because you're going into the tightness. And so you may feel more symptomatic in the beginning, but I promise that once you incorporate the up training, the contraction, everything will balance itself and right itself, and correct itself and solve itself. So this reverse Kegel is something that is, and I teach this in my yoga programs as well, that it's about this letting go. You let go so that you can receive. So many of us are so tight down there. We can't even make love without, experiencing no orgasms, weak orgasms, or there's some kind of pain or bladder symptoms. I mean, you name it. And it's because the pelvis is just too tight. In the last 3 years, they coined something called pandemic pelvis. And I'm like, sorry, the pelvis was already tight before the pandemic. The pandemic just made it worse,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, because of the collective trauma that women have experienced. I mean, and on the individual, and all we have to do is look at the Me Too movement to know, what that was about.
So, how can women who are like, "Oh my goodness, this is what I've been looking for," how can they work with you? How can they take part in your programs?
Well, I'm going to give you the link to the program so you can put it up in the podcast.
Perfect.
And then they can just click on that and get all the information that they need. They can go to pelvicpainrelief.com to check out all the different offerings. But I'm going to give you a specific link that you can share with the audience that I think will help them a lot.
Amazing.
Because I believe, and also if you want me to give a Kegel checklist, I can do that too. I can
That
give
would
you
be
those
great.
links.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's like a free gift that they can have, because I believe that we ultimately hold the key to our own healing, and that, this story is about us. It's not about anybody else.
Yep.
And when we hold it and we trust it and we believe it, we can create miracles for ourselves. And
Ashe.
it's time that we start believing in miracles again.
Ashe. Yes.
Hmm.
Um, my life is a miracle in no small part because of your work. And I'm so grateful for you, Isa. And thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for coming and talking with me today. I know that my audience is going to get so much out of this. And all the blessings to you. I'm so excited to see what you do next. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me here, and you saved yourself. So to me, that's the greatest honor. When you take the information and you incorporate it and you do it for yourself, you are the example of what all women can do. So that is the most important thing. Everybody says, "Oh, you said you did this and that." So no, I didn't do it. You did it. I was just there to open the door. I didn't really do anything. I just opened that door and you went through it and you grabbed. So you are the shining light, right? Because you are here to show women what's possible. So I'm really honored to be here today. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Isa.
You're welcome. Bye.
Queridas, we made it to one of my favorite parts of each episode, the moment of flow. I love poetry. I love words and rhythm, and how when you mix the two, you get into a beautiful state of flow. And so I want to leave you with that at the end of each episode. So here it is, your moment of flow. Burning lights. I have sailed across time to find you. I live in you. The flower that grows, the seed, never knew. Time warps the story, changes the players, cuts and punches collapsed in the corner on my bed. In my life, breath comes in and I'm more than a player. The view is worth the time. Breathe now. She shadows me in wisdom, and I am lit. I walk with time, make myself the honey trap. No one is going to tell what's mine to show. I stand on a cracking city block, but I feel mi tierra under my feet. The salt from food trucks is el mar in my nose. That's not a train racing by, it's el viento ripping through trees. The view is worth the time. Breathe now. She shadows me in wisdom, and I am lit. I cross this ocean, flooded by their stories. I've sailed across time, chased it, cursed it, mastered it. Know her secret? Time is always and now. Keep breathing, see all of now. Stop breathing, see always. The view is worth the time. Breathe now. She shadows me in wisdom, and I am lit.